Shipbuilding in Starfield is hard. Now, I know there's going to be 100% agreement with me in the comments and everyone can understand what I'm talking about. But it's probably because you've never tried to meet some of this criteria and to run the holy gauntlet under these conditions, which the game doesn't really want you to be able to do. There is one place where girls and boys go and take their ships to test their skill and their setups, and that's running the gauntlet against the Crimson Fleet in the correct system at the key. This is where we put particle and lasers used to melting steel in epic combat, the Colosseum of Starfield, which is kind of interesting to me because it's much harder to actually do places like, say, Alpha Centauri, where there's 30-40 ships. But it's a great place to start, and it's a really good way to test your vessel. Now, the claim to fame is always putting the game on very hard and soloing the Crimson Fleet. It's like a badge of honor, good test for your ship to pass. Now, where shipbuilding gets very difficult in Starfield is when you're trying to build a heavy cargo hauler beast of a vessel that has nearly all the habitations you could want, can carry 30k cargo, and has everything you could dream of. But the unfortunate side effect of having this kind of ship is that you cannot get good mobility at all. And that's the point. This specific scenario is very hard to get done right and also be able to solo the key on very hard with consistency. Now, you can build a crappy class A, stick some good particle cannons on, and go solo the key because you'll have speed. And speed is one of the best advantages you can have in Starfield in combat. On very hard, that is an absolute necessity depending on how you configured your ship. So in this video, we're going to go on a journey where we try build the biggest Class C ship you can without mods, having over 30k cargo with all the habitations you could possibly dream of, while still looking fairly awesome, and then trying to figure out how we can configure it so we can solo the key consistently. Is it possible? I don't know if you've tried this, but this isn't for the faint of heart. And this is where shipbuilding gets really hard in Starfield. Now, my journey begins with rebuilding the Vista III. Originally, I was going to do a shipbuilding video where we make the biggest baddest Vista III we can, but ship build videos these days aren't really trending, so I didn't want to waste my time on that. But if you people are interested, we could definitely do that. There's enough of a want. But the Vista, being one of the awesome, heaviest, and with the highest level unlock, and one of the longest, I mean, there's probably 10 ships that have the same length, that has the max length of 40 in Starfield. It has just a supreme look, but it's one of my favorite ships that I've turned into super haulers over and over again, in most cases having zero mobility and just having as much possible cargo you could possibly have, because that's the way I like to play for quite a while. I was gun hunting, and my use case was I need as much storage because I would be looting and selling as everything that I would come across, and I spent hundreds of hours doing this. So for me, and maybe for you, this is the kind of build you'd be interested in, something that kind of does it all. But where it will lack is in the space combat. Now, the interesting thing about space combat in Starfield is that 90% of combat is ship spawning directly in front of you. So it's a very simple just to put all your guns facing forward and just sit there, burst the 3 ships on very hard and just melt them all. Now, where the key or the Crimson Fleet, Gauntlet, Colosseum, whatever you want to call it, is that there'll be ships spawned up above, below, and all around you. So this is where things get very tricky when you're trying to build a ship to specifically do all the things we just mentioned, plus also be able to solo the key on very hard. So the building process began, and this took quite a lot of time. Now, as you know, what Starfield desperately needs is a way for us to view the interior habs without having to leave the shipbuilder. But not only that, they need reconfiguration options for each individual hab, where we can switch places of ladders, doors, benches. There should be, at least for each hab, 5 different options of how to sort and arrange that individual hab to meet our needs. And maybe that will come down the track. But that's one of the real critical things, and one of the hardest things when it comes to shipbuilding, is actually getting all your habs working efficiently and functionally. Now, for me, this ship is based on redesigning the Vista, so it is one extremely accessible, one or no ladders to get to the cockpit. That was definitely one of the key things. It needed 30k cargo, and it needed to have nearly every hab that you could possibly want, 11 crew. So with all this in mind, I started to put things to work. Tried quite a few different configurations over many hours. Now, one of the important things to me is I really need an engineering bay behind the cockpit, and when I enter the ship by the lander, if you're like me, you're doing constant hunting for legendary weapons, so you're constantly upgrading, messing around with a bunch of things. So that was one thing I needed. This is going to include an infirmary, 2 engineering bays, your research, captain's quarters, your companion quarters, mess hall, you name it, we've pretty much got it all on here. The reason for that is because I know a lot of people do like to live or spend a bit more time in the ship. Me personally, I don't, but I wanted to entertain the idea to have it all, just in case I do. Now, the designs went through quite a few iterations, and one of the other things I wanted to try keep was all the main little bits and knickknacks from the original Vista. Now, changing the cockpit location was really fighting against, but for functionality purposes, it's really nice and easy where you have the Docker up front and you have the cockpit as quick as access as possible. And for me, having workbenches above and below is just absolutely awesome. I had to really think about and configure where the reactor and the grav drive went. So I went for more of an unusual build where, since we moved the Docker forward, I was able to place the reactor, the grav drive within the center of the ship, sort of surrounded by cargo, which would be cool if something like that actually gave added protection depending on where you place things. That'd be a really interesting factor, but again, that would probably limit a lot of different expressions of shipbuilding. The other thing I wanted to try to do different this time was to at least have some mobility. So I was aiming for around 20 mobility, which isn't much, but it's something. Because the other thing I was considering trying was going back to where you just like every single allowed item on your ship is pretty much cargo. But as you know, it becomes completely unusable in terms of very hard combat. We needed some kind of mobility and some kind of thrust or speed, but that is extremely delicate thing to do if you're trying to reach these specific categories. And that's the kicker and the killer of this, that we're trying to build something very specific needs to really challenge ourselves and to see if we can really hone in and figure out like how important weapon placement will be, and is this something even possible. It's really important to remember that this is on like NG plus 11, which means all the enemies are already buffed higher than all the previous universes. So things are already harder, and you put that on very hard, it does add definitely a more unique element to this. So this might be more possible and easier on earlier universes. So definitely keep that in mind. I probably should have mentioned that earlier, but if you do go out and test this, make sure you test this on NG 10 or 11. Now, I tried to muck around with the engines to see what I could get away with, but there's really only one choice, as you know, when building giant Class C ships, and that's the 6830 engine, which you can attach 6, which ties in first with the highest combined thrust of 108,000, and most importantly, the highest combined maneuvering thrust at 52,800. So these are really the only choice for engines. Now, they do weigh a lot, but there's no way around this. If we lower the mass via changing the engines, we'll have no mobility at all because it doesn't have the high enough thrust. The only way to get around that is to reduce the weight, which we can't do because we are going for a super hauler with 30k cargo. So 6830 was really the only engine we could use. So the shape and form started coming along well with this cargo locking around the reactor and the grav drive, and mobility was looking terrible. So yeah, I jumped into those 6830 engines, and that gave us a little bit of mobility to work with. And one of the other things we're going to try combat in this build is that we need quite a high hull. So there's a few ways we could go about it by adding lots of landing gear or being decisive with our reactor. But first, I just was trying having the NG50 landing gear as well as the NG20 landing gear, which gives you landing thrust of 4 and a hull of 4, but it has a lot of mass, so that was always the downside. But I was going for a higher hull, so we picked those. As there's not really many things that can actually give you more hull. The main things are your reactor, your landing gear. Those are really the main things because there's not much else that actually gives you hull. So those become tricky because there's not a lot of options there to really expand. Oh, and the other thing is obviously your cargo that can give you a bit more hull. Not much, but something. So we sort of got it all looking quite nice. Now we're up to the stage where we get to sort of muck around with the web placement. And this is where things get really interesting because designing a ship in this very specific scenario, which if it can solo the key, can pretty much do any engagement after that, any battle engagement. But we need to be very technical about how we sort of design the weapon placement, the weapons we use. And we're getting close to being able to sort of give our first test to really see if it's even possible, really. So the last few things I was doing was just sort of reconfiguring some of the fuel tanks, some of the overall look of it to see if I could get it just, adding a few more extra details to make it look cooler. Because that was another factor that we're trying to include, make it not look like a flying brick, but having some form that was a bit easier on the eyes, that could also be recognizable as a Vista somehow. So that was the last sort of mucking around bits and pieces. So it started to look quite good, I thought. Now we could start mucking around with the weapons. And this is where things to me get very interesting because weapon placement can or is a really important factor to consider when trying to build this ship in this scenario, because we have to work against a few things that aren't typical within the game, which is the typical thing is 90% of engagements, the ships spawn in front of you. And with that fact alone, we have to go through a lot to get to the end of this. Now, the first thought is always to just go all particle weapons because they have long range. They have quite bad accuracy though at long range. As soon as you pick up a bit of speed, their hit rate definitely drops, but we're not flying too fast, so it only really is determined by how fast the other ships are flying. So the idea is, because we're so slow, we can't really maneuver very well. We kind of have to rely on our weapon placement and the weapons we choose. So we need hard-hitting weapons that have good range, that can pack a punch. So that was what we went with. So that was an easy thing to decide on the weapons. We just got the 3 best particle turrets, and we just sort of chucked them facing forwards. We put some facing backwards to the sides, and we also went for the Vanguard Obliterator auto projector, which is the only manual firing weapon, to see if we could get away with also trying to attack ships at the front. But this was kind of the first setup for weapons, and we finally got to the point of trying to test this. So we did a little bit of a flight test just to sort of get an idea of speed, and then we jumped over the Crimson Fleet, and oh boy, did I have my work cut out for me. So first jumped in there, tried to muck around, and then within a few seconds, really, I was absolutely smashed, trying to just keep smashing the repairs. Now, unfortunately, I did forget to record that first instance, but I did get destroyed very quickly. And this one, I'm just doing more of a cinematic point of view, and just to see how all the weapons were sort of working and firing, to sort of try collect data to see if we can shift things around to make it more potent. And yes, absolutely had to go back to the drawing board. So having the weapons tied close to the body was not working. So then I figured, what about if we try space it out and give a bit more separation from the center of the ship and put them kind of on wings on the outside. So I thought we could try that sort of setup, base them in different directions, and then test to see how that went. So I got all the best particle auto firing turrets again. We did swap out the Vanguard Obliterator auto projectors. So that was the next test. Weapons out to the wings, seeing if that would perform any better. Now, I did want to test to see what this would be like when you actually try the hardest challenge, which is trying to solo Alpha Centauri. And that is an absolute nightmare. I don't know if you've tried that using a slow ship, but we're talking anywhere between maybe 10 to 15 ships and they'll also keep spawning in or warping in. So it kind of almost goes endless for a period of time. And yes, absolutely no luck there. So then we finally went over to just try test this in Serpentis against some ships where there wasn't so many. And of course, the ships spawn in front, so it's very easy encounter. There wasn't really any problems there. You can definitely get away using something like this throughout nearly every situation, but we need to solo the key. So after doing that amount of testing, I went back to then trying to say maybe bringing the weapons in a bit closer is going to be the ticket. So I got rid of the additional extensions and just tried to place the weapons all facing forwards this time to see if I could just point my ship forwards and have better luck that way. So a quick test in Serpentis again, just testing that out. And of course, it's just crazy how quickly you can destroy ships in that scenario. So this will 100% work, but is it going to really be any different when we go and test it against the Crimson Fleet? Off we went to the Crimson Fleet, and oh boy, definitely helped taking out the first few ships that were right in front of us. But then we are completely exposed to everything else around us, making it very, very difficult, if not impossible. So I tried this and tried this to see if I could fly differently, if my positioning could change, who I attacked first. And the only thing that really changed the results of this would be if I got the luck of the gods and I got the worst spawn for Crimson Fleet, where they're missing a lot of their Mark III ships. But I actually never succeeded with this current weapon configuration. I got very close, but just couldn't get it. Now, so it's back to the drawing board with this. Now, looking at the reactors. So I was thinking maybe we could increase the hull by using the Pinch A reactor. That grants the highest hull possible in the game. No other reactor comes even close, but you do get less power. Now, I was trying not to lean too much on using companions, but that would be another way you could get a bit more extra power. Now, the perks definitely come in handy here. Getting the perk that increases your reactor is an absolute must. Maxing out as many perks on your ship is also a must to get even close to be able to pull this off. So something to keep in mind. So I changed the hull and then started doing some testing again, keeping the weapons close. All I changed was the reactor. And again, it didn't really do much to save me in this situation. So I tried kind of switching the weapons around where they were facing, see if we could work out something a bit more efficient. I also changed the grav drive just to reduce the weight a little bit. And I thought I'd give that a try. And lo and behold, that really did not help me at all. So back to the shipbuilder, tried adjusting the weapons again. And then with this current configuration, I actually got lucky, got a better spawn, and I was able to clear Crimson Fleet once. But that's not really enough. We need to do it consistently because I got a bit of a lucky spawn. But it was nice to be able to get some sort of resolve that it is possible, or at least it's within grasp. But at least in this test, having all the weapons facing forward but sort of separated out a little bit, with a bit of luck, you could beat Crimson Fleet. But we need to do it consistently. Then I tried to put some of the weapons facing out, and it was off to the key. I'm trying to keep your ship in the best position position, using thrust, accelerating, was quite tricky to manage. So I was getting absolutely smashed trying to use this configuration. I tried multiple times over and over again. And this is where I got an unusual idea. So I spent a bit of time pondering on is having the weapons split on side to side means that they're spreading their DPS to ships in either direction. But what we really need to do is we need to kill ships as quick as possible in order to help try eliminate damage towards us and help us sustain a little bit longer life in this particular challenge. So I think the idea here is we're actually going to try put all the weapons on one side. That way we're not spreading the DPS, and it'll be up to some more technical skills to try keep our enemy ships on one side and aligned so the weapons are all firing at once, typically at the same ship, which should in fact, in theory, increase our chances. Now, another important thing to note about taking on the Crimson Fleet is there's probably about, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 different ways the ships will spawn. So depending on this factor, you may get a very easy run at clearing the Crimson Fleet because you might not even get any Mark III Crimson White vessels or the Wraiths. You can actually get off quite easily. So keep that in mind. You do have to sort of test this a few times to make sure you're not just picking the easy version. And I definitely tried that and I had no luck. So it was back to the drawing board. So let's have a look at trying to place all these weapons on one side. Okay, so we sort of reconfigured the ship a bit where we extended the structural aspects to it, added some wings, and we lined up all the particle weapons on one side, which looks kind of mean. The other thing we did was change the shield to the Vanguard Bulwark shield. That's a very nasty shield with the third highest health. And the good thing is it's quite light compared to the others. So less mass, but it is locked behind the Vanguard questline. So keep that in mind. I also went back to the sheared flow reactor because that is a little bit lighter too. What's interesting, if you got rid of all the extra structural parts, it doesn't actually change the mobility at all. It's nuts. So I just kept that all. I was looking to try see if I could lose any weight, but I'd have to get rid of cargo basically, or perhaps change some of the landing gear. But I ended up just testing this. So all the particle weapons on one side. I don't know, to me it kind of looks cool. And unfortunately, I didn't get any footage of that for whatever reason, but I did test it over and over again. It definitely fared a lot better than I expected, but still wasn't going to be enough to be able to solo the key consistently. So I thought maybe I could change it up and mix all the weapons. So have some laser, have some ballistic, and then extend it out further, which makes it look really silly, but I thought it was worth a crack. So pushed everything out using some extenders. And the idea and the thought behind this was to give some of the ballistic weapons a bit more range and perhaps just trying to kind of change the odds a little bit. Kind of looks ridiculous, but it was worth a shot. So I chucked them all on and it was kind of interesting to try this, but obviously this was not going to be enough easy either. But one thing's for sure, having all the weapons on one side was definitely the best method to try do this. Now, I did have a couple of successes using this method, but a lot of the time it just would not work. So with a lot of testing of trying to maneuver my ship to the best sort of possible way, ducking in and out, trying what I could, I was able to get it twice with this configuration, but really it looks like particles are going to be the best bet. But we're kind of running out of options here. And this is where I'm going to palm it off to others because I haven't been able to succeed in building a ship where it meets all the conditions mentioned and it can solo the key consistently. So this is where I hope some of you guys might be able to try this challenge. And if you do, definitely let me know, send me your save and we can go over your build. And if you actually pull this off under all the circumstances mentioned, because that would be awesome. But for me, I'm going to go back to the drawing board and maybe do a part 2 of this where we get to the succeed in building this. Now, I probably could drop 1 or 2 cargoes and then max out my payloads. So I'm only on rank 3. So that's probably going to be where the wiggle room is, and that's what we'll explore in part 2. But definitely give this a crack. Let me know how you go. Thought this was kind of an interesting experiment to test all these different things. But in any case, peace out and I'll catch you next time.